Hello, everybody, and welcome to Base Recruitment Clinic. I've got with me Captain Steve Rennison, who's going to be running today's event, and I'll shortly pass over to him. If this is your first time coming to one of these base events, then I'll just let you know that you are muted automatically in the room, but you do have the ability to talk to us, and that's really what today is about. We want you to engage as much as possible. So there is a chat function within the page where you can enter in any questions that you may have. So please take maximum opportunity while we have Steve with us to draw upon his expertise for anything to do with recruitment. Steve's going to be taking you through a short presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time to answer any questions that you may have. Steve, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hope everybody's okay in these rather unusual times, which leading up to Christmas have caused a few people problems, I know. So I'm hoping that nobody's been too badly affected by that, but we will have to get on with it, don't we? So this is the first clinic that I've done for Base, and I want to just stress the word clinic. I do webinars all the time, but this is very much more about you guys being able to have a chat and talk about things. If you've got any particular questions and things like that about the whole recruitment process, and I'll go through a little bit about what we're going to talk about. But before I actually go into the full presentation, I see we've got about 5 people on the call or on the thing. I'll go through something that's going to last maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, absolutely max, and talk a little bit about some things that people have been asking about regarding pay to fly and things like that. But then afterwards, you guys can just chip in, and anything at all about the recruitment process for airlines specifically, you just let me know, and I'll do my very best to answer them for you. So a little bit about me. I started in the RAF many years ago. You can see a little photograph there. I'm in the slightly more sand-coloured aeroplane there, the bottom one. That was a B-24 Liberator that I was very lucky to fly across the Atlantic 200 years ago. I ended up as head of pilot management for Thomas Cook, and we all know what happened there. And in the meantime, I've set up a consultancy called Aspect Aviation. And it's through the consultancy that I do a lot of the recruitment stuff. But when I was head of pilot management in Thomas Cook, I was responsible for recruitment, not just in the UK, but I also had some responsibilities in other parts of the group. So I've got a pretty in-depth knowledge of the recruitment side of things. So in the talk today, as I said, it's an open house. I thought it'd be worthwhile, because people have asked some questions already about this, if I just talk a little bit about pay to fly, apprenticeships, self-funded type ratings, and salary sacrifice schemes, because I think they are things that are really important to understand about if you are embarking on a career. And inevitably these days, if you're embarking on a career, you'll already have spent an awful lot of your own money to get to a certain part or certain position. What I'm going to tell you, though, just bear in mind that these are my personal opinions based on experience. So you really need to make your own decisions about anything when it comes to aviation. Just seek out advice and seek out opinions, but make sure that you make your decision and not decisions that other people try and make for you. So if we start off with the concept of pay to fly. So pay to fly is something that became extremely popular more in the sort of late 90s and then earlier on in this century. And to be honest, they're not particularly highly regarded, and they're absolutely not regarded by any of the unions. In fact, they're hated by the unions. And what a pay to fly is typically it's somebody who has, in most likelihood, but not necessarily, got their own qualification. What do I mean by own qualification? Maybe you've already got your own type rating on a particular type. You know, you've gone somewhere and had paid money and got the type rating. But the type rating is just that. It's not very much because you haven't got any experience. So it was a way that airlines effectively allowed you to fly their aeroplane, but you would pay for the privilege. and by paying for the privilege, they would take you through to getting your line check done. And that could cost you anywhere between 25 and 50k in UK pounds. Really, really expensive. And personally, I don't find it a particularly ethical way of going about things. But pay to fly, I'm sure it still exists if you look hard enough for it. But if it's ever something that you think about, be really, 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 really careful about it, because it's going to cost you a fortune. The next entry route to flying aircraft that people are starting to use, and probably a bit more at the moment, are apprenticeships. Jet2 are a really big advocate of this. And effectively, they bring you into the company, but for X amount of time, and it varies between company, but for a certain amount of time, you'll be used in other roles all the time, building up to then starting your type rating training. What sort of roles? People end up working in ops, in crewing, things like that. And then in the meantime, they'll also be doing a little bit of liaison with flight operations and building up their knowledge of the company. And that would normally lead to you getting, at the end of it, a type rating. And then that's normally the end of it. You've got the type rating, you're already working for the company, then off you jolly well go. So they are becoming more and more popular. And the reason they're becoming more popular, you may as well be honest, is because the government gives money to companies to do apprenticeship schemes. So it's quite attractive for them. I alluded to self-funded type ratings. And this is what I really want to talk about. A lot of people ask me all the time, should I pay to go and get my Airbus type rating? And I think the answer to that is for you to answer your own question. What actually is the Airbus type rating going to get you? It's going to typically be ground school, X number of simulators, followed by an assessment simulator at which somebody who's suitably qualified will now stamp you to say that you now have an Airbus rating. The problem from an airline's point of view about that is it doesn't really tell very much about you. There's no real history of you, and there's no real way of checking on the credibility of the particular company or agency that has done it. So if you are applying to an airline and you have got a type rating, which is effectively nothing, you haven't actually flown the real aeroplane in all likelihood, or if you have, you'd have done one base check, which will be literally, I think legally it's got to be an hour, but probably you've only done about 30 minutes actually at the controls of the aircraft. So again, it's a huge amount of money to fork out. And it's not going to guarantee you a job, because you're still going to have to go through the exact same assessment process as everybody else, because your hours are going to be so low, you can't just be fast-tracked. So they're going to really look at you. You've spent all of that money. And if you screw up the interview or the simulator or the group exercise or whatever they're going to give you, you've just spent a significant amount of money, probably in the region of 20k plus, with no guarantee of a job. And then the final one is salary sacrifice. That is probably the most ethical of these schemes. So what a salary sacrifice scheme is, a company will assess you and hire you on a loose contract that says, we will put you through a type rating. At the end of that type rating, we will, because you've just passed our assessment, and provided that nothing has changed, offer you a job. You will then start flying for that company. Now, there's different ways of doing it, but mostly what they revolve around, and I'm just going to head forwards to some things, you might be able to see that on the screen. What they most usually revolve around is you will not be paying up front, or not too much money up front. And what they then revolve around is over a period of time. And for the sake of argument, let's say 5 years, your salary was reduced in comparison to somebody who hasn't done this by X%, and X% of your monthly salary will go back to the company to pay off the money they've spent type rating you. There's different variations of it. I put up on screen one here which showed who is applicable to. You can see the sort of things that they're looking for. And this particular one was a Thomas Cook one. And you can see what you got for it. So you got type rating conversion, aircraft training, which may or may not include base training, and airline training, and then a conditional first officer contract. This particular scheme, there was no upfront cost whatsoever from the individual, apart from people who were frozen ATPLs. They were charged an amount of money for their interview, but if they were successful, that money would have been refunded. So it's a relatively affordable way of doing things. And then, just for your interest, there's some of the things that you would have to be able to go into a scheme. And it's very similar for all the airlines. So X number of hours, total time. You've got to have done an MCC course. You've got to have certain English levels, right to live and work in particular countries, because obviously this is a worldwide thing. But the most important thing to think about is you've also got to be able to produce a criminal record check, because without one of those, you can't get an airline pass. Without an airline pass, an airline won't touch you. So they're really important things to be aware of. So that's actually all I wanted to talk about initially, to give you guys a bit of information surrounding some of the pitfalls of those schemes and hopefully differentiate them for you. The floor now really goes to you. This is now your opportunity to ask me anything at all about recruitment, assessment profiles, simulator profiles, interviews, CVs, whatever you want to do. I'm going to have a sip and it's over to you.
And great. Just while people are sort of collecting their thoughts, I've got a question for you, if that's okay, Steve.
Joe, you did an amazingly brilliant impression of a Dalek then, so I'm not entirely sure what you said.
Oh, apologies. Hopefully my sound's better now. Can you hear me okay? Okay. If not, I tell you, I'm going to type in the box.
Okay, so Joe's just sent me through a question. Do you think that more airlines will be looking to have pilots self-fund type ratings? It depends on the language that you're using there. If by self-fund going out to Estonia and flying with any old rating agency just to get the rating, no, I don't. I really don't think they'll do that. It's not really something that airlines can easily then control. And let me be honest with you, the problem is, if you're paying 20,000 euros to a company to get a type rating, and by company, I don't mean the airline you're trying to join. It's in that company's interest to make sure you pass, because if everybody fails, nobody is going to go to that school and pay 20,000. And the problem with that is they also don't ever have to have the responsibility of you flying their aircraft. So it's very difficult to know how well you were trained and how well you performed. So the answer to the question is no, I don't think they will be looking to expect people to self-fund type ratings. And I don't actually remember ever recruiting anybody who'd gone down that road, if I'm honest. But don't wipe it off. It is still something you could do, but you really must think about it incredibly carefully before committing to that sort of money. And I personally don't think it will give you a massive advantage, if any. So if somebody's been out of flying for a while, what type of skills would you be looking for at a pilot interview? That is a really good question. I can show you something that might help. If you just bear with me, because we're going to have to flick through a few slides to get to this. Let's have a look. those are the competencies that ICAO list as requirements for pilots. And the EASA has basically cut and pasted these, and at the top they've actually put knowledge as number 1. So they've got 9 points. But those are all the things that, regardless of whether you've been off, from flying for a week or 10 years, those things are still things that are expected from you during pilot aptitude training. And they shouldn't be surprising to you. So obviously procedures, flight path management with automation, because most modern commercial jets are fully automatic, but you have to then be able to show that you can do them manually. You have to demonstrate leadership, because even as a junior first officer, you're second in command of an aircraft. You have to demonstrate good, solid problem solving and decision making. That's often one of the reasons why they will ask you difficult questions, but also maybe things like group exercises. And the same applies for number 7 and number 8. So they are things that are almost mandated that you can expect, whether or not you've been off for a week or a year or 2 or 3 months. Now, that said, the sort of skills they'll be looking at in interviews. Firstly, at an interview, you will need to demonstrate to them, what have you done in this time? We all know COVID has screwed everybody around, but what have you done? Because that's what's going to make you interesting to the recruiter. Did you just sit at home watching box sets, or did you go and polish aircraft at your local flying club? Did you just sit at home watching repeat after repeat of Downton Abbey, or did you go and volunteer in your local NHS hospital? Anything at all that you have done or can do that demonstrates that you are determined and didn't just sit around will really help you explain why, even with COVID, which they know about, you'll be able to say, look, I'm sure you know that many people haven't been able to work because of COVID, but what I did was, and you're starting to differentiate yourself then from other people who frankly won't have done much. Does that help the question? If you've got anything more on that, just come back to me. My name is Kennedy. Firstly, great name. My dream is to become a pilot because I can't afford to take a private country. Okay, I've gone through BA interview and been successful. Okay, so from what I understand about that, you're looking at the cabin crew route. So private cabin crew training. So there are schools and companies out there that do cabin crew courses. And again, it's the same advice that I've been talking to people who are looking at becoming pilots. If you're going to go and do a course, you really need to invest your time to, first of all, research the company. Have they got a reputation, good or bad? Secondly, what is it I get at the end of it? Is it just, I mean, you can go and buy a degree certificate off the dodgy internet for just about anything. It doesn't mean to say it's any good. So find out what they are going to give you at the end of it and what they're going to give you if it has any credence in the airline world. So there are some schools that are quite closely linked to some airlines and therefore will be known. There are others, or these training organizations that prepare you for cabin crew. They kind of put you through a pseudo system, but there's nothing actually at the end of it other than, well, you've done it, pay me the money. Now, I'm not an expert in it, but all I would say is you have to really think carefully and do not commit to part with any money till you've absolutely looked into it and decided in your own mind that it is something that might be worthwhile doing. Does that help you, Kennedy? Hopefully so.
Steve, I just wonder whether you can hear me now. I've just had a message to say, yeah, oh, perfect. What do you think about the route if somebody's wanting to become a pilot, can't necessarily afford the training? What would you say, in your experience, about the route of becoming cabin crew first as an entry into the aviation world, and then hopefully going on to then become a pilot once you're in?
So a lot of companies actively try and recruit from within because it's, apart from anything else, it's great PR. I can tell you an absolutely true story. My very first ever commercial flight as a pilot with passengers on, the cabin manager, the cabin senior, purser, different airlines call them different things. He was the guy who came into the cockpit and served me tea and coffee during that flight. And he is now Deputy Director of Safety for Emirates. And to get there, he ended up being a captain on the 767 with My Travel Airways. So he absolutely went through the routes of junior cabin crew, senior cabin crew, junior pilot, senior pilot, director in one of the best airlines in the world. So the only limitation on you is you. That's it. If it's something you want to do and you show the drive and determination, and obviously with aviation, there are certain things that may be slightly out of your control, certain health conditions, the ability to pass aptitude tests and things like that. But that aside, then it's entirely up to you where you end up. And you can do it.
That's great advice. And I think for anybody looking to pursue an alternative route in, I think, like you said, there's a lot of airlines out there, and I came across a few in airline training as well who were looking to recruit from within, and actually they saw a huge benefit in the fact that somebody had been through all of the cabin crew training. They're aware of sort of the SOPs in terms of communication between the flight deck and the cabin, different scenarios, and actually it was a benefit because they could see things from the other perspective as well. So when they were eventually a pilot, they could appreciate other roles, and the role that the cabin crew could take, which actually was seen as increasing safety.
So I think, Joe, you're spot on with that, because what it does do is it gives you a far better all-round education into aviation. So don't forget, if you go through the flying school route and then it all happens very quick and you do your type rating and then you go and sit in the right-hand seat as a junior first officer under training, you literally there will be no money. Let's be honest, it's about money. There's not enough money in airlines to then put you through some sort of orientation course for what happens in the cabin. It just doesn't exist. So having that extra level of knowledge is only a positive. It's not a negative. And I know so many people who fly now who were originally cabin crew. Another one, for example, in Thomas Cook days, the person who did all of our back office IT to do with leave planning and your personal development and all your simulated profile marks and everything. He was an ex-British Airways cabin crew member who became a captain and then a base manager for Thomas Cook. So again, it's really quite common.
Okay, perfect. Are there any more questions from anybody? Anything that people would want to ask, either specifically about the type rating question or more broadly, anything to do with recruitment, while we have Steve with us today?
And while you're thinking about it, let me just say something to you all. Presumably you can hear me. But there really is no such thing as a silly question. The only silly question is the one that you wish you'd asked. So don't be shy. There's going to be inevitably on calls like this people with a high level of knowledge and people with no level of knowledge. It doesn't matter. There's no such thing as a silly question. Okay, we'll wait a couple of minutes just to see if anything else comes through. You can ask me things about things like CVs, interview types, what to expect from an interview, anything at all. We can have a little chat about it.
Okay. One of my questions, just while we're waiting we've just had one come through, but if I can just interject one very quick question. What would you recommend in terms of the aptitude testing if you were going through selection?
Yeah.
Would you suggest, is there any way that people can practice for those aptitude tests if they're sat at home? Online?
There is, and again, I'm completely aware that for people trying to join this industry right now, it's difficult and money is tight. So again, I'm sounding like a broken record. Before you invest any money, do your own research. But you can go online and you can type in pilot aptitude testing, pilot compass testing. There's so many of them. And then in there, firstly, a lot of the companies that sell programs do a few little freebie ones with 3 or 4 questions on, just to give you an idea of what they can do. So you can already get an idea of it for free just by doing that. And then the second thing you can do is there are books you can buy to do with pilot aptitude testing. The areas that people find the most difficult is sometimes the sort of, especially the numerical reasoning, maths. That's quite tough. And then there's a lot of it based around shapes, fitting different shapes together and doing things. And actually those, it's genuinely a technique. That's all it is. It's a technique. And once you've got the technique, then life becomes a lot simpler. So definitely prepare for it, but equally don't just go and spend all your money on all the books straight away till you've worked out exactly what's best for you. And things like flying clubs and WhatsApp groups, there's always somebody who's got one that they're finished with, or a membership that they might accidentally let you log on for. But I didn't say that. But I think you'll find, for those of you who are new to this, that everything to do with aviation tends to be rather expensive. And that is unfortunate. So don't waste money if you don't need to. Let me just show you. I can just share my screen very briefly if I can get to where I'm trying to get to. So this is what we're talking about, I think. So those are the typical sort of aptitude questions that appear. Just a couple of examples. So the top one is to do with shapes, and the bottom one is to do with interpreting a lot of language with numbers thrown in as well. And as I say, you can do practices online and you can sign up and you can pay, but it's definitely something to work out. And in case you're wondering, the first one, the answer is 5, but I haven't got time to explain why.
Lovely, thanks, Steve. We've got another couple of questions that have just come in. One from Vivian here. I was a chief pilot for a gliding club. I have 6,500 hours of flight, 1,500 hours on airplane, and now drop pilot on a caravan. That sounds like great fun. All job offers I saw lately from airlines and private jet company request a type rating and at least 500 hours on type. My training is completed, 43 years old. Do you think it's too late for me to reach an airline?
So that was from, I can see this chat, this is from Vivian. So it's a really difficult question and hard to answer right now. Look, the truth is, when airlines start recruiting, which they will do, there's a huge pool of people with a vast amount of experience out there already. And they will be drawing from that. Let's not mess around. They are going to take a lot of experienced pilots back in. Of course they are. However, let's look at it slightly more holistically. I'm going to do it backwards. Don't worry about your age. Okay, so my first, if you want a CV tip, there's absolutely, unless the company asks you to, there is no reason, certainly in the European regions, to put your date of birth on a CV. It's nothing to do with them. Your age is your age and yours alone. So don't put people off by putting your age on your CV. Once you've got to an interview based on your CV, then it becomes very difficult for companies to, let's say, not continue with you if they think, oh gosh, he or she is a little bit older than we expected. Tough. You're protected by age discrimination law. So don't worry about your age. Worry more about how well you've prepared. That's what is going to be really important. So regarding the hours, I can't really talk deeply about gliding. Different companies and different regulatory authorities factorize hours on gliders differently. So it depends where you've done it and blah, 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 blah. Obviously, 1,500 hours on an aircraft is great, but a lot of companies will want X number of hours on an aircraft over 5,700 kilos, which is classed as not a private aeroplane. It's slightly bigger, but not necessarily. But on what you've written there, in the normal times, pre-COVID, you, to me, would be a perfect candidate to go through something like a salary sacrifice type rating provided by an airline. Because they say, look, he's got a demonstrable record, or she's got a demonstrable record, you've got X number of hours, we can put you through a type rating and you'll pay it back over the next 5 years or whatever, because you've got experience. So I do not think it's too late for you to reach an airline. I do think for the next 18 months it's going to be difficult. And there's another one from Kennedy. What is a late age to start a pilot career from zero? How long is a piece of string? That's a really difficult one. There's no such thing again as a late age, and I know people who've entered flying training at 40. I would say that the longer you leave it, the more you're going to have to demonstrate at an interview why it is that you started at 40 and not 30 and not 20. So you have to be able to justify things and show enthusiasm and a huge amount of drive, and then that's fine. Henrik, you've flown the CRJ. Okay, I think the aircraft is about to be retired. So do you think I need to find a job on another type? Okay, well, on another type, it's difficult. You've got demonstrable flying time on the CRJ, which is a valid jet aircraft. Think of it this way: if I was flying for Ryanair and I decided to move to EasyJet, then by default, I've only flown the 737 probably, and by default, I'm going to have to learn to fly the Airbus. If the airline wants me, they will type rate me. It's pretty much as simple as that. And if you were in at the beginning, the problem is about going to pay for your own type rating. It's a really tough call, but certainly when I was recruiting people, if they'd done their own type rating, to me, that counted for very little. I would be more interested in the person. And even if they say you have to have a type rating on the Airbus or the Boeing, just remember, they can see from your CV how much experience you've got. So the blunt truth is, if there's 10 jobs and there's 100 people who've got 500 hours on the Airbus, and then you who've got 1 hour, who would you choose? When times change and we go back to a more normal recruitment profile, most airlines budget on having to do X number of type ratings a year. Some airlines don't because they're very small, but most of them do. And as to choose between the 737 and the Airbus, look, when the MAX scandal was at its height, I would have said the Airbus. Now the MAX scandal is mostly solved. Yeah. The rating depends on where in the world you're thinking of working and what is the predominant type in that part of the world. Really, it's just that simple. So if you were to go to the UK, have a look at who's flying 737s in the UK. Who's actually flying them in the UK? So there's Jet2, but it's a fleet now that they've started to complement with 320s or 321s. So there's a difficult choice already. BA went all 320s and then have decided to buy some Maxes. So again, that makes it a difficult choice. So I can't answer the question, I'm afraid.
It sounds like it's a bit of it's a risk assessment on both sides, from the individual's point of view and also from the airlines. And the airlines obviously want to keep their costs under control, and they want a reliable person going through type rating and then on and having a successful career in the airline. So it sounds like it's a risk assessment on both sides. You want to be the most employable you can, but the airline also wants to have a pool of people that are going to reduce their costs in terms of their initial training overhead.
Yeah, and I think Joe, again, you're spot on there. So the things to remember when you look at trying to get an airline job are most people I would see who on paper would be good candidates would fail because they've done no preparation for the process or the wrong preparation for the process or haven't really thought about things enough. Not, turning up at an interview with a type rating is absolutely no guarantee of anything at all, because you've got to get through their assessment program. And the type rating itself, in actual fact, let me just go off on a tangent. Just think about it this way. The type rating itself can actually be almost negative if it's a type rating that you self-funded. Because if you've self-funded it, by definition, you've got very, very little experience on it. But it's on your CV that you've got the rating. So they're going to ask you questions in the technical side, and you haven't got any experience on it. So you're going to then say, well, I've got this rating, and they're going to undo it by asking you questions you don't know the answer to. And you've got no experience on that type to fall back on and waffle your way out of it. So it can actually create its own problems as well. So again, I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying 20K, 15K, it's your money. But it is not a guaranteed door opener.
Okay, lovely. Are there any sort of final questions for Steve that anyone wants to pose? I'll just do sort of another 30 seconds to allow people to type them up. But if not, Steve is an active contributor on Base, and so if you do want to get in touch with him, then I'm sure Steve will be able to provide his contact details. There is actually a group on the community where people can ask any different recruitment questions that they may have. And then I'm sure we'll be back again and we'll do another clinic at a later date. If anyone wants to, obviously the times are changing very quickly. Everything can change in a month or so, and there might be a different set of questions that people have. But yeah, please feel free to get in touch with either Steve or myself, and check out that community page and that group if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask. Steve, have you got any final thoughts for the group?
No, I'm really pleased that people have joined in today. As Joe said, I've got a group in Base, which is an insider's view to recruitment. You can ask questions on there. And also, guys, I'm working with Joe. We can do this regularly. If you've got subject areas you'd like to sort of drill down on, just ask, and we can fix it, and we can do a pitfalls of something, or advantages of this or advantages of that. No problem at all. And I wish everybody luck. It's an awful time. It's really, really difficult, but it cannot go on forever, and it will change. And please get in touch with somebody. If you've got questions about anything, get in touch, and do not spend money until you've researched what you're doing, because there's a lot of people out there would very happily take 20,000 euros off you, but make sure that that's going to produce some sort of positive result that is worth that investment. That's my kind of final message. Oh,
yeah,
and another one. Merry Christmas to everybody as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve, and thank you everybody for coming on. I hope you've found it useful. And like Steve said, if you've got any areas that you'd like to cover on the next one, please get in touch and let us know. Okay, thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everyone. Bye now.